In this lesson, we will examine some important properties of fraction. A fraction is a number of the form where a and b are integers and b is not equal to 0. The integer b is called the numerator of the fraction and b is called the denominator. Now, let's see the property of fractions. The first property is that any number n is equal to the fraction n over 1. So, for example, 6 is the same as 6 over 1 and 18 is same as to 18 over 1. Another important property is that any number n over 0 is undefined. In other words, we cannot assign a value to this fraction. Here's why. If we think of fractions as representing division, then dividing by 0 is the same as asking how many times 0 will divide into the numerator. And as you can see, this is impossible to compute. Another way to look at this is to consider the following example. When we take 6 and divide it by 2, we get 3. This also means that when we multiply 3 by 2, we get back to 6. So, if we want 6 over 0 to have some value, then it must also be case that when we multiply that value by 0, we get back to 6. Since it is impossible to have such a number, we simply say that any number n over 0 is undefined. Alright, another property says that n over n is always equals to 1. Notice that we have the condition here that say n cannot equal 0, since the 0 over 0 does not equal 1. In fact, 0 over 0 is undefined. Here are few examples that demonstrate this property. Now, another property says that 1 over some fraction a over b is equal to the form b over a. So, for example, 1 over 2/3 is equals to 3/2. Similarly, 1 over 6/5 is equal to 5/6. In each case, notice that we are merely taking the fraction in the denominator and flipping it. Now, this brings up an important definition. The reciprocal of a over b is b over a. In other words, the reciprocal of the fraction is the flipped over version of that fraction. Alright, another important property is as follows. The fraction a over b times the fraction b over a is equal to 1. In other words, the product of a fraction and its reciprocal is 1. So, 2/3 times its reciprocal of 3/2 equals 1. Now, our next property deals with the consequences of increasing and decreasing the numerator and denominator of a fraction. To begin, if we take a fraction and make its numerator bigger, the effect is to increase the value of that fraction. For example, if we take the fraction 6 by 14 and increase the numerator to 7, the value of the fraction increases. In other words, 7 by 14 is greater than 6/14. Conversely, if we take the fraction and make its numerator smaller, the effect is to decrease the value of the fraction. Now, what about changing the denominator? Well, if we take a fraction and make its denominator bigger, the result is a decrease in the value of that fraction. For example, if we take the fraction 12 over 3 and increases the denominator to 4, the value of the fraction decreases. In other words, 12 over 4 is less than 12 over 3. Conversely, if we take a fraction and makes its denominator smaller, the result is an increase in the value of that fraction. Okay, let's try a few examples. These two fractions have identical denominator, but their numerators are different. As such, we can use their property to determine which fraction has the greatest value. Since the fraction on the right has the bigger numerator, it must have the greater value. Now, these two fractions have the identical numerator, but their denominators are different. So once again, let's use our property to determine which fraction has the greater value. Well, since the fraction on the left has the smallest denominator, it must have the greater value. Finally, in this example, the fraction on the right has smaller denominator. so it must have the greater value. Okay, our last property. This one says that if we take a fraction and increase the denominator and numerator by the same amount, the value of the resulting fraction will be closer to 1. For example, if we take 7 over 9 and add 10 to the top and bottom, the resulting fraction 17 over 19 is closer to 1 than 7/9. Furthermore, if we take 17 over 19 and add 100 to its numerator and denominator, the resulting fraction is closer to 1 than 17 over 19. Okay, let's summarize. In this lesson, we learned several important properties related to the fraction.